There are times when I worry if I'm saying something that's extremely cliche.
People often say, like, oh, are you trying to create sort of like virtual boyfriends?
I've got so many questions I want to know, and I'm trying to figure out what's appropriate in which order.
Yeah, it's a great question. Because, like, for example, there was that whole thing about how people would read 50 Shades of Grey on the subway.
So welcome to the show, Caroline. We're here to talk about your wildest prediction. So let's kick off with that. What is your wildest prediction about the future?
Hi, Tom. My wildest prediction is that in the future, people will listen to porn instead of watching it.
Wow, that's quite against this moment. We seem to be sort of surgically attached to our screen, sort of staring at anything that moves. What makes you say that?
Well, we are recording a podcast, and so there are several kind of genres where audio has really made it to the forefront, but erotic content is not one of them. For example, music, podcasts, audiobooks, and then of course regular books. Imagination is a really powerful tool. So happy to dig in more. But I run an app called Quinn, and it's an app for audio erotica.
Tell us more about this app. It sounds quite intriguing.
It's sort of like, people call it like horny headspace, but we have like a lot of these voice actors. It's like also sort of like Spotify, where you can browse different voice actors on Quinn, and they all basically voice erotic stories, but they're really immersive. So you're sort of in the story with them. They're around 20 minutes long, and they're talking directly to you. And it's really been cool to see. We've grown 400% year over year for 2 years. And we're just kind of on a mission to make ethical, immersive, female-first erotic content. So.
And how is this stuff made? Like, who writes it? Who produces it? Who voices it? Can anyone have a go and sort of be part of a marketplace or something?
Yeah, exactly. It's basically a marketplace of these voice actors that script, record, and edit their audios, which of course wouldn't be possible if it was visual content, or at least it would be a lot harder. So yeah, the creators, we call them.
There are times when I worry if I'm saying something that's extremely cliched, but is it kind of true that there's a bit of a sort of gender delineation here, and sort of men like seeing things or sort of touching things, and women work more with their imagination? Or is that a very lazy, stupid thing to think?
No, I mean, I think it's hard to say why Quinn resonates with women. I think that's, one possible explanation. Another possible explanation is that our whole current porn industry is kind of molded in the male gaze. And, for example, like romance novels are really popular with women because for the most part, they're written by women. And, there's in the porn industry, most of these production companies are run by men. So Quinn is kind of trying to make something for the female gaze, but I guess it's audio, so it's not really gaze. The female ear.
I've got so many questions I want to know, and I'm trying to figure out what's appropriate in which order. I mean, how are people supposed to use this? Is this a sort of, is this making your commute more fun? Is this a sort of way to fall asleep? Is this sort of about like sex and sort of orgasm, or is this about sort of relaxation? Is it about entertainment in a sort of less sexual way? Like, what's this really about?
Yeah, it's a great question. Because, like, for example, there was that whole thing about how people would read 50 Shades of Grey on the subway, right? So there's some audios that are more of a slow burn that you could listen to in the car, on the subway, or whatever. And they're also, in general, in an audio, like the first 10 minutes are sort of set up and foreplay and not super explicit. But then I would say you want to be alone, probably in your bed, for the ending part of most audios.
So there is a sort of ending to these things. It's not sort of a background thing.
Yeah.
What made you come up with this idea?
So I came up with it in 2019 when I was studying computer science at Stanford. And I struggled with something called FSD, which is female sexual dysfunction, following an eating disorder that I was struggling with in college. And basically nothing worked for me. Like, there's no equivalent to Viagra for women. A lot of the advice you'll find online is sort of vague and confusing. And I was just really kind of struggling to find my libido and get my groove back. And I stumbled upon audio erotica on Reddit and Tumblr, which is where it kind of originated, and fell in love with the genre. and or the medium or whatever, and thought, oh my God, this needs to be a thing. This needs to be the thing for erotic content, and the rest is sort of history. But yeah.
And is it sort of almost prescribed in a way? I mean, is this a kind of a treatment for a dysfunction, or is it something much more lighthearted and fun than that?
Yeah, I know. When I say that, it sounds kind of like a treatment. It's not at all a treatment.
Okay.
It's an entertainment media platform. Yeah.
And has it been hard raising money because there's a sense of taboo about this? Like if you mention the word porn to the VC world, do they sort of freak out, or are people quite sort of open-minded?
Well, it's interesting that you say like the word porn, because it's like a trigger, right, for people. But in the sort of like truest sense of the word, porn is like content that arouses, right? So that could actually be a whole host of things, including romance novels, Quinn, visual erotic content. But I think when people hear the word porn, they think Pornhub. They think about sort of the visual kind of tube site porn that we've become accustomed to. So it's been really important to just sort of draw a big distinction. Like we could not be more different from that type of content. And yeah, it's been really difficult, obviously, to raise money for the company, but we've done it. And I think also you can never predict how someone's going to respond to Quinn as like a concept. Some of the people I thought were the most buttoned up, conservative investors were the most open to it. And people who kind of came across as maybe more footloose and fancy free were, more repressed, for lack of a better word.
And I mean, what sort of category is this in? Like, what sort of market share is it taking? Are these sort of people who were sort of enjoying looking at other stuff that are moving to this, or is this sort of adding into people's rituals and their daily habits for something they weren't doing before?
Well, 70% of women use their imagination when they masturbate. There isn't really an existing player that's captured this market entirely. We certainly have a ton of competition. I'm not trying to say we don't, but I'm just saying this has sort of been like the toughest nut to crack. And so that's what we're trying to do. I would say like other like competitors like Audible, for example, like audio romance novels, obviously visual content like Kindle Unlimited. I think about the other Tumblr, Reddit, other places that our users have gotten this type of content before. Wattpad, if you've heard of that. Yeah.
But this is sort of more specifically designed with this need in mind. It's sort of shorter format and a bit more sort of accelerated in some way, a bit more intense.
No, that's exactly it. Like, I think a lot of women would love to have the time to read 200 pages, right? Every time they wanted to get off, but that's not realistic for like the modern woman's like kind of lifestyle. And Quinn is almost like a quick hit of that romance novel vibe where you get some plot, you get a real like kind of sense of connection with the person speaking and so on.
So when you go on, what do you kind of search by? Like, do you want me to sort of look
let me show you.
time it takes, or like accents, or sort of topics, or authors, or like how does it kind of work? Like, how do people find what they want?
Yeah. Okay. So this is what it looks like.
Oh, wow.
This is our latest like celebrity voice series by a woman named Victoria Pedretti. She was in You. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
And then you see like we have playlists and different audio tracks.
Oh, wow.
And then the categories. So like this is like often as a new user, I'll read it to you, but it's like accents, boyfriend, coworkers, dirty talk, edging, enemies to lovers, exes, FDOM, which is like female in the dominant position, MDOM, which is like the male in the dominant position, historical, in public, infidelity. You get it. But yeah.
So you must get quite a lot of a sense of the kind of current sort of pulse of the nation, almost. Like a sense of what are people suddenly sort of looking for? Does it change?
Absolutely. Well, someone asked me this the other day, and it's very interesting. Since the launch of Quinn, our number one most like played tag has been boyfriend, which is kind of interesting. But I would say I definitely see ebbs and flows in other things. Like if like when Bridgerton came out, we had a big surge in historical, interest, or if there's like kind of, yeah, just like a cultural moment around something, I would say we definitely see that.
In your sort of journey so far, what have you found, and this can be in any way, that surprised you the most?
Well, okay, this is kind of a random one that occurs to me, but I think I wrongly assumed that marketing a product to women would be easy. I thought, I'm a woman, I know what's like what I like, you know, you just make it pretty, you make it cool, whatever. I think women are the most shrewd, sort of see right through any marketing bullshit, and they just cut right to the core of what your product is. And it's been extremely humbling to market a product to women. I just feel like it's just been amazing, because it's like to earn the respect of the female consumer, specifically for a product that doesn't have to do with like her external beauty or weight loss or something like that. Like it's a product she genuinely has to like, right, to use. It's just been a really kind of fulfilling experience to earn the customership of women.
And
if that makes sense.
when you kind of look at your customer base, I mean, is it entirely women, or does it sort of just skew heavily that way? And are people coming in and then spending longer and longer and telling their friends? Like, what's the sort of profile?
Yeah, great question. So it's 70% women, 30% men, which interestingly is the inverse of Pornhub, which is more like 70% men, 30% women. And by the way, I actually think, like, per my prediction, that men will eventually use Quinn in great numbers. And I think often, like, women will tell their boyfriends or their partners, like, hey, listen to this with me. This is really working for me. You know, like, I'm feeling turned on, and and I want to share that with you. And it's a really sort of playful and light way to share that type of moment. Whereas I feel like sharing a clip from Pornhub is really kind of doesn't feel very good in a couple.
Is there a kind of like a sort of ethical move behind it as well? Because there's obviously quite a lot of concerns with the production of porn and everything that goes on behind the scenes and the economics of it all.
Yeah, it's a really, God, it's just such a tough problem. And I don't claim to be like an expert on the porn industry. What I do know is that it's very difficult to make ethical visual porn. And we're lucky that we can sort of bypass a lot of those ethical concerns just by it being audio. That said, it's definitely totally possible to make unethical audio porn, right? You could like steal it or host it illegally, whatever. But I think that visual content historically is a more fraught, difficult like genre. Yes. And I think also, I mean, for consumers and performers alike, I think everyone wants a better option is the bottom line, or there's nothing wrong with adding another option. Right.
People always assume that these things have to take market share from something rather than add to it. Is there, I mean, is there an impact of technology on all this? You know, when you first started talking about the app and the idea behind it, you know, because everyone's always talking about AI, it suddenly sort of hit me that obviously AI could be writing these stories, AI could be personalizing them, our voices could be sort of generated by AI. Is that a sort of threat or an opportunity for you?
I mean, it's interesting because so much of our business, we're really lucky that we work with these creators that have like diehard fandoms, those like creators I was mentioning, the voice actors that create these audios. And so when I try and think about the role of AI, while I'm sure like the technology will become so much more part of our business and everyone's lives, like I just don't see AI ever being able to do that job because of just, it's like imagining like if, I don't know, your favorite musician was an AI, it would be just like, what? It would be terrible. So I think it's not just about the production of the content; it's the humanity and the connection and the intimacy you feel with the creator. But I think in terms of like recommending audios to users and other ways that AI supports content businesses, I'm sure. And we're paying attention to it. I'm sure there are lots of ways in which it will become like a more and more important technology for us. I just don't see it ever like replacing creators, I guess.
I mean, more sort of broadly, what do you think the sort of future of sort of sex in the digital world is? Because it's very interesting how taboo this stuff all is. I mean, I've worked in advertising most of my life, and the idea that you might place an ad on Pornhub would be absurd to most brands. But at the same time, the traffic going to these sites is extraordinary. There's something quite interesting about a modern world where there's so much transparency and there's more honesty and more connection. But almost everything about the internet that's ever been written would be in complete denial of the existence of pornography. The fact that almost all tech advances have normally come in first, through pornography. And yet we never talk about it. Do you think this can be part of a movement to try and sort of destigmatize it somehow?
Absolutely. And it's a really just interesting thing to look at because like you say, like in some ways, porn has been sort of relegated to this like dirty hidden corner of the internet. And then in other ways, it's all around us. It's Bridgerton, it's 50 Shades of Grey. It's, these stories that capture the minds of people everywhere. So I guess it kind of depends what your definition is of erotic content and how willing you are to rethink it and reimagine it. And that's kind of the whole thing with Quinn is like, we're trying to broaden people's like experience with, erotic content. And instead of having that feeling of like slamming your laptop shut and shoving it under the pillow and feeling embarrassed and shameful, you just feel like, oh, this is just an integrated like part of my life that I enjoy. And that's part of my relationships and part of my well-being.
You've obviously had a bit of VC funding behind you. Are they giving you a lot of advice and telling you what to do and sort of forcing you to grow beyond this? Because I would never call it a niche because it's obviously a huge part of more than 50% of the world's population's lives. But I kind of wonder where the plans are for this to kind of go. Do people expect this to broaden out into video content or to be more about sort of general wellness or, sort of mental replenishment or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly, like, I think it's, I think like the main misconception with Quinn, like you're saying, is that it's a niche, that it's that's for audiophiles, that it's for people that only, like this one weird kind of tiny, like, I don't know, niche, I guess. But the whole point of Quinn is that we're trying to introduce a genre of erotic content that has the potential to actually be completely mainstream. And so that to me just is like a massive opportunity from a VC perspective. I definitely think like VCs are starting to see, just to speak to the general venture climate, like who's swimming with their clothes on a little bit. There are a lot of businesses that raised way too much money at fake valuations and now it's time to pay the piper. But otherwise, and I consider Quinn lucky that we didn't do that, even though we tried to. Like, I mean, we didn't try to raise it at fake valuation, but we certainly have tried and failed to raise at various points. And I think we lucked out that we were on sort of like a shoestring budget because it really helped us stay true to the business and figure out what was moving the needle.
Are you growing sort of internationally at the moment? Is the site just in English? What kind of markets do you think you'll go to?
Yeah, we've just started introducing more and more bilingual audios. So we actually they'll be like English, but with mixed in dirty talk of like say Spanish or whatever. And we're just kind of seeing how that goes. But for the most part, we are totally international. We're available worldwide, but most of our audios are in English.
And how do you think sort of technology could change what the app becomes? I mean, is there a sort of long-term future vision that technology will be such that, VR headsets are obviously a classic example, although sort of completely against the spirit of imagination and audio, or, sort of things that touch you. There's always been these sort of various items of clothing that are supposed to sort of envelop you with a big hug, with your sort of boyfriend or girlfriend that's across the world. Like, do you kind of have this sort of big dream that somehow, sex will be sort of removed from location in that way, or is that not really sort of part of your canvas, I guess?
Oh, it's so interesting. People often say like, oh, are you trying to create sort of like virtual boyfriends, right? This concept you're talking about. And I feel like that's one interpretation, or like that's one possibility. It's not really what we're trying to do, but I think another one is just like raising the bar for your IRL, for your like in real life relationships. So like you listen to an audio on Quinn and you're like, oh my God, I didn't even know what aftercare was. I didn't know that like, these were the types of things I could say to ask for consent in a really sexy, gentle way, right? And then in your real life relationships, you try it out, or you see, and people always say like, oh, like, the bar is in the sky now after listening to Quinn or whatever, because it's a way to learn about this really intimate part of life that we don't get to see. We don't get to see it on TV, or we don't get to see what our friends are doing. And so it's hard to find really good resources to learn. So
do you kind of worry a bit that this starts to take away from real life companionship in a way? Like there's a lot of reports about how lonely people are. There's a lot of data that suggests that people are having less sex, across all demographics. Is there a sense that this is sort of moving towards that world of not really talking to other people, and there being sort of technology that gets in the way?
I'm sure that's always a risk. And there's this phenomenon called parasocial relationships. And I think it's about the extent to which like the individual lets that, take hold of their lives. Like, I think having, to some extent, like all of our relationships to influencers and content creators and celebrities are like a bit parasocial. You hear people say, oh, my favorite podcaster is like my best friend. It's like, no, you don't know them, right? So I think there is a bit of that dynamic at play, and it's really important for us and for everyone to keep in mind that, these aren't real. I mean, it sounds kind of dystopian, doesn't it? But it's like, these aren't real friendships. They don't know each other. And holding those boundaries, both on the creator side and the listener side, is very important to us.
What do you think you can sort of do about that? I mean, do you have this sort of sense that your role could be to ensure that people almost consume this in a kind of responsible way? How can this sort of trigger real life moments as well?
Well, one thing that Quinn offers to creators that I think, for example, like an OnlyFans doesn't offer to creators, is that we really handle a lot of the management, community management, moderation, maintaining a quality bar across the platform that you don't get on something like an OnlyFans, where the creator really has to bear the burden of interacting with, both the respectful fans and the not so respectful fans who are constantly pushing their boundaries and so on. And we really, with Quinn, we have community guidelines. We don't tolerate sort of excessive boundary pushing, obviously harassment or bullying or anything like that. But I think like harassment can also fall into that category of like presumed real life closeness. That's not okay, right? So yeah,
it's always weird to me because we didn't really grow up in preparation for this world. We're kind of designed to live in small tribes or small villages. And I find the idea of sort of asymmetric intimacy particularly interesting, where, anyone on Twitter with more than a couple of thousand people, they feel like they're known by some people, and yet they're kind of strangers. And there's a sort of a one-way sort of intimacy almost. And it's interesting to me the degree to which we've not really been sort of prepared for that. What do you think are going to be the big sort of opportunities and challenges for the future, would you say?
I think one challenge with Quinn that we've already kind of started to crack a little bit is how to get people to talk about this genre in a way that feels comfortable for them. And you're really dealing with like a spectrum of comfortability around sex. Like you have some people who are super like sex positive and open, and some people who are, have literally never talked about sex out loud in their entire lives. And those two people could be in the same demographic, like the same, superficial demographic. And so just like something we think about all the time is Quinn as like a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? So like, how can we make these like pink headphones for Quinn. We do these celebrity voiced series. We try and find ways to talk about it that feel light and fun and social and easy. And so that's just a big challenge, is how to get people to talk about it, right?
Are people quite happy to share the fact they're on the website?
now.
Yeah.
But definitely not always. I mean, I remember when we first were looking for creators, we would post like Craigslist ads. We would be on, the site called Backstage, which I think we actually got kicked off of Backstage multiple times, like, trying to get people to work with us. And now obviously it's a lot easier.
It's extraordinary the degree to which it's kind of a taboo, as if somehow people are doing something wrong. I mean, so as you look towards the future and as Quinn continues to grow and it brings in more content creators, what do you wish this to kind of end up doing? What would you like your kind of legacy from Quinn to be?
Wow. I mean, I feel really strongly about how this has changed the lives of women in particular. Obviously, our product is not just for women, but I would love if my legacy was moving the needle just a little bit towards a world where like the pleasure gap has been closed, and there's sort of a more equitable world of sex happening where women's pleasure is like a priority. And I think sorry to go on a little bit of a tangent, but I think what people get wrong about the pleasure gap or women not, the orgasm gap or whatever, it's not all on men, right? We all have to work together. Women need to know what they want. And in order to know that, they have to be exposed to it. And I think this whole kind of running joke, oh, men can't find the clit, like, oh, men are so dumb and whatever. It's like, well, women don't know either. We're all working together to try and create a world that previously hasn't existed where men and women both have kind of equal footing in sexual interactions.
And in some ways, those conversations always seem quite difficult these days, like to have very honest conversations and to talk about things in quite a deep way, and to do so without rushing to judgment or assuming bad intent. It seems quite hard in the sort of modern era somehow. People are kind of ready to jump on you. And I think quite often women in particular are quite keen to jump on top of each other and sort of cast aspersions or something.
Absolutely. It's a very hostile environment and broad conversation. So I think, and when just the idea of bringing stories and imagination and fun and lightness back into this genre, that's what's exciting to me, right? It's because sex is so tied to that. It's so tied to tension and plot and story and love for, and romance and these things. It's we kind of forgot about all of that, the mental aspects of sex.
It's very true, actually. I feel like to be alive in the modern era is to always be sort of overstimulated. And the more and more devices that we have, it's sort of bigger screens that are closer to our eyes with better quality resolution, and they move and they have better sound, and everything's sort of being done for us. The whole sort of future of AI seems to be this doing our thinking for us. So I think anything that helps us return to a slightly more sort of intense but less stimulated environment, and one that allows our head to be the place where the magic happens rather than our devices, I think there's something really compelling about that direction and that intention. So it's great to see this exist in the world.
I might also just add, I sometimes use this analogy that Pornhub and visual porn, mainstream porn, is like fast food, and Quinn is cooking at home. And the feeling of cooking for people, it's so, for if you're really taking your time, you have space and time to do it, it's so kind of romantic and fun and creative, right? And while fast food might taste better, you might get that quick hit or whatever, and you kind of end up feeling sick after. You shouldn't really eat that every day. It's kind of bad for you. There are preservatives, whatever. And with Quinn, it's just this more sort of creative expression of sexuality, I guess.
I think that's a really nice metaphor in a way, and the idea of sort of wholesomeness in a way. And it's not saying fast food is bad. It's just a way of reflecting on our diets and saying, what should we be doing more of and what should we be doing less of? And how do we carve out the time to do something that's more nourishing in a sort of more sustainable way? So, well, Caroline, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much. And I wish you all the best with Quinn.
Thank you so much for having me.